And to get us started this evening will be Emily Bolyard and Kyle Mechelin to explain what is NIL. Emily and Kyle.
Thank you, Bill. Our first part, we're going to do a brief introduction on NIL. So first, what is NIL? NIL stands for name, image, and likeness. Now, name and image coverage is pretty straightforward. That's going to cover your name and an actual image of yourself. Likeness can be a little difficult, but it includes a description of the athlete, whether it's your face, your body, or any other part, or any distinctive attributes to an athlete that the public would recognize. So for example, on the screen, you'll see a sweatshirt of a Taylor Swift likeness based off of her body and also the distinctive clothing that she wears. The public knows that this is Taylor Swift without an actual image of Taylor Swift being on there. And what NIL deals allow for student athletes is that they are allowed to be compensated for using any parts of their name, image, or likeness for a commercial or a promotional aspect.
As NIL has been unfolded and athletes have been getting involved, we've seen tons of different levels of involvement from different brands and different levels. Some athletes have been lucky enough to score national brands in sponsorship deals with Jack in the Box, Nike, Gatorade. But more frequently, what we've seen is regional, local, and personal brands being capitalized on. Regional brands being local to the area and in a position to invest in athletes and to invest in sponsorship, whereas the local brands would be more like the pizza place down the street from the stadium. And those provide great opportunities for branding exposure and development of an athlete as well, on top of the revenue that is earned. One warning as you look for NIL deals is to be cautious when dealing with alcohol or gambling companies. We will go a little bit more into this, but some states, some schools, some conferences have very specific rules about who you can and cannot be making a deal with. So current examples of what some athletes are doing. We're going to get further into these as part 2 of this program goes, but essentially we've seen some very exciting opportunities being taken advantage of. Jack in the Box released a national campaign in the name, image, and likeness space, literally just giving contracts and sponsorship deals to people who have Jack in their name. A creative, simple, but fun way to get involved in college sports. Other athletes have taken upon themselves to create opportunities. USC quarterback has created a food truck that he uses for charitable purposes, and then later in the evening uses it as a podcast studio where he's able to showcase stories he's passionate about and profit off of his name. And on top of that, another personal brand that was able to be capitalized on by athletes is University of Southern Florida players were able to capitalize on this NIL opportunity with a special teams camp where they just trained other kids with what they are passionate about and what they know.
Now, the road to get to NIL has been a long one, and we first see the first push for it with O'Bannon versus the NCAA. Here, the Ninth Circuit ruled that NCAA must permit certain schools to provide up to the cost of attendance to student athletes, but they weren't required to hold money in a grant. However, having this cost of attendance was the first time student athletes were getting more than just tuition, books, room, and board. And cost of attendance covered just what it says, cost of attending college. So this could be transportation or other costs that normal college students have. Following this ruling, we see in 2019 and 2020, California and Florida passed legislation allowing student athletes to earn endorsement money. This helped push the NCAA to loosen their NIL regulations because it came from 2 states that were very populated, but also had a lot of influence in college sports. Finally, we see in NCAA versus Alston et al. That the Supreme Court ruled that the NCAA cannot limit certain education-related benefits for student athletes or else they're violating federal antitrust law. This ruling was really the latest ruling that caused the NCAA to drop their NIL regulation.
So while the NCAA was ruled that it had to allow student athletes to make money off of their name, image, and likeness, upon July 1st, 2021, which is when those changes went into place, there was very little in terms of guidance and policy from the NCAA, leaving a sort of patchwork of legislation and regulations on what student athletes can and can't do, because there wasn't a central, and there still is not a central voice regulating and providing guidance. So schools and athletes began to experiment in this area. A lot of it was with minimal guidance, do things in an appropriate and ethical manner.
So with no federal legislation and no immediate action by the NCAA, states, conferences, schools, and teams have been left to deal with how to regulate NIL deals. And this had led to different states and different schools having different rules. So currently about half the states have enacted NIL legislation. We have a number of other states that have looked into introducing the bills or have actually introduced the bills into their state legislation. And we're also seeing conferences and schools enacting their own policy. The NCAA has come out with its own interim NIL legislation, but they don't seem to be at the forefront of wanting to regulate what is happening in the NIL world. And so because there's no real central body regulating NIL deals, if a student athlete would like to look into NIL deals, they should contact their school's compliance officer because they're going to get the most accurate information for themselves in that location.
So without any real guidance from the NCAA, many states have taken it upon themselves to actually pass state laws to regulate and provide guidance and to further emphasize the legality of these transactions. Currently, there are 27 states that do have legislation in place, as well as multiple in the process of passing legislation. And at the federal level, there are 8 bills that are currently kind of being juggled, but none appear to be incredibly close to being signed into law. So to focus down a little bit more onto an area that would interest Horizon League athletes, we'll dig into what Horizon League has state-wise.
For right now, states in the Horizon League, we have Wisconsin and Indiana being the only 2 that don't have any sort of legislation. For student athletes in Wisconsin, they should be aware that the Wisconsin state legislation has started talking about enacting legislation. They don't currently have any introduced right now, but that is something in the future that could come up.
So to recap what we have to share with you, currently NIL is a very interesting and lucrative area for student athletes to get involved in. However, due to a lack of one central voice, there are many different voices regulating how NIL transactions can proceed. Because of the importance of student eligibility and compliance, we want to stress that as you begin to explore into NIL, to be aware of the different levels of regulation that you're going to run into, from the NCAA to the state that you're playing in, to the conference that your school resides in, to your school itself, or even specifically teams sometimes will have regulation. The best thing you can do before digging into the NIL space is educating yourself on what you can and cannot do to protect your eligibility as an athlete. Please feel free to contact Emily or I. Our emails are on this screen. We're happy to answer questions regarding NIL law or put you in contact with people who may be even better equipped to help you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emily and Kyle. You did a good
Thank
job of
you.
laying down a good foundation of NIL.